Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit more about goals. And we're actually going to be talking about an article where the author, whose name is Christian Swan, talks about some critiques about SMART goals, which are a widely used, widely referenced goal-setting framework, and suggests open goals. And we can talk a little bit about some of the critiques that he brought up. We could talk a little bit about this concept of open goals, how they can be applied to tennis. And we can also talk about other sorts of goals, things like process goals, things like that. And, maybe have a little bit of a broader conversation about how different sorts of goals can be applied to tennis performance and what we find to be effective and maybe what can tend to get in people's ways with goals, and that sort of thing. But yeah, curious, Brian, sort of as a starting point, what you thought about the article in terms of, some of his critiques of SMART goals and the idea of open goals.
I think for SMART goals, I think a lot of the critique is valid. And sometimes, and I think this is true with sports psychology education programs or even what practitioners do, they can sometimes get wedded to a particular methodology of doing something, and that's what they try to fit everything into. And I think what we're seeing more so in all of sports psychology is really trying to come up with more individual strategies and approaches that work for certain people and that work in various situations. And so to me, I recall SMART, that framework, being taught in graduate school as, yes, this is a framework that you should use with all your clients, and here's what SMART means, and we can go over some of the various terms that are used with SMART. And I guess I've always been the type, Josh, that wonders, is this really the one way to do things? There are many ways of doing things. And I think tennis is like a wonderful sport to prove that, because we've often talked about top 10 WTA players, top 10 ATP players. How many of them have the same forehand? None. They all hit the ball a little bit differently, but they have their forehand, and they've made that work. And so goal-setting frameworks like SMART, I think, are useful to have some knowledge in, but not to necessarily be so tied to it that you can't see other things and see other approaches. And so I thought that was good. And then the idea, the other type of goal that at least is presented here, I think there are different kinds, but that we could cover today as well, Josh. But this idea of an open goal, and it's in some ways it's a bit vague what that exactly means. We'll give some examples what an open goal is, and I think in many ways we've been promoting some open goals on career as a tennis player. So one of the interesting parts of the article, I think, with respect to SMART was, number one, it's not actually psychologically validated, right, in research that it's effective. But secondly, the author brought up that there were a couple of meta-analyses in which they were looking up how many terms are used to define smart, right? And one study came up with 34, and another, I think this came maybe from the physical rehab world, came up with 55 different words that were used as part of smart. So I've heard, I'm not, and I don't have nearly this many, but I think the general starting approach for smart is S is for specific, M is for measurable. A often I think been a lot of things, but oftentimes it's achievable or attainable. R I have seen as relevant or related, and then T is usually time based. Are there other words, Josh, that you've seen?
I've seen some of those different variations you've talked about: adjustable, achievable, relevant, related, things like that, time based, timely. But I think, yeah, as the article pointed out, as you mentioned, that part of the issue is that there's smart goals are being encouraged or pushed, but there's not even a clear understanding about what they are because people use their own version of it. So yeah, no, I think it's a definitely an interesting point, and I think there are certain benefits to SMART goals that it can provide a helpful framework, a helpful structure, so people can think about, okay, I'm not just saying my goal is to play well out to play well, or to my goal is not just to work on my game and improve on my game, but I really want to be specific with that. Okay, how do I want to improve on my game? How much better am I hoping to get? What aspects of my game am I hoping to improve on? Can I measure whether or not I've made progress? Is it attainable, right? Does it not feel, it's not that I want to be the number one player in the world by the end of this year. It's that, maybe a goal that feels a little bit more attainable or realistic, right? So I think with a lot of these different pieces, they are good guidelines, but I think that the author made some very fair points in terms of some of the issues with this type of a model.
Yeah. And I think, where a player is in his or her career also matters. Now, most of people listening to this podcast are not total beginners, I don't think, with tennis. They've got some experience. And so in that regard, SMART goals can make sense. But if you're a total beginner, SMART goals may not make any sense whatsoever. You have very little context for what you're trying to achieve. You're really in the hands of a coach or a pro who is really directing what you're, the beginning of your learning journey. And so those goals might be, much smaller in terms of, we're working on this little thing, and you may not even know what the time frame is for picking up a particular skill. So I do think that, so if we look at the actual acronym, setting some specific goals, and again, in certain contexts, makes sense. Whether that's, working on your first serve percentage or getting stronger, eating healthier, it can apply to different parts of your tennis project. The measurable part is making sure you're looking at certain metrics, because at some point you want to understand, did I actually achieve my goal? And without having it to be fully subjective, yeah, I feel better, or I feel like I've improved. A SMART goal might give you more data on that. I thought his objection to achievable was interesting, because we often talk about, to truly improve, you have to make yourself uncomfortable. And should your goal actually be maybe just beyond achievable? Should it actually stretch you more than it does? So that was kind of interesting. And I guess that's really all in how you play around with that. So maybe that's a more pedantic type of objection to it. I think the relevant, related one, that's the one I always have a little bit of trouble with, because I think if we're talking in the context of tennis, we ought to be able to figure out, all right, is this really a relevant goal for your game or not? And we're generally not going to put down irrelevant goals. And then the time-based, I think that one can be hard. We had our conversation with Kathy Uchschneider, who works a lot with 6 week goals. I've also read something recently that ideas like 5 year, 10-year goals don't make a lot of sense, especially now with how quickly things change, and that people are looking more like 120-day types of goals, right? So 4 months being sort of the furthest one can project out, and I've used that research, Josh, to help me work with players on coming up with essentially a 4-month project plan on what they're doing. And I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily using SMART as strictly as it's being, maybe preached by others. I tend to look at the other types of goals that we talk about, which are more like outcome goals, performance goals, process goals, but also if we shift to maybe some other people in the goal space, like a James Clear, more like a vision of who you want to be kind of thing, right? If you've mentioned this before, you've done presentations and so forth on James Clear and Atomic Habits, and the idea of like, all right, you want to, start being an author, or you want to write a book, or you want to run a marathon. Really, step one is see yourself as a runner, see yourself as an author, and craft that like vision statement of who you need to be first, and then kind of get into the performance, and the process goals, and maybe what the outcome goals are on that. So I think SMART has some useful parts to it. And it is certainly something that's is worth talking about. Now, I have one client, I think he's very interesting. Well, actually, before we get into that, let's talk about open goals. Like, so there's an example in there, Josh. What do you, from the reading, what did you get that an open goal is?
Yeah, it's essentially a goal where they give the example of Ash Barty, where in her final tournament, in her final Grand Slam, she pretty much said, it really did make the Australian Open so much more enjoyable for all of us to be able to go and say, you know what, this is just one last crack. Let's see what we can do. Right. So sort of this idea of, let's see what's possible. Let's try to do my best here. And it's kind of similar to this idea that we've talked about in the past of making a goal of, being the best player that you can be, where it's not necessary. It goes against certain aspects of the SMART goal framework, where it's not necessarily time bound, where it's not, let's be the best, see the best player that we can be in the next 5 years, right? It's not maybe as specific in certain ways, but it's more open, it's broader, and it's more about, just seeing what's possible, seeing what you're capable of. And I think that there's absolutely a place for that. I think in a lot of ways, it's opposite of the SMART goal framework, right? It doesn't necessarily, in certain way, it's tougher to measure. It's tougher to measure. Did somebody end up performing as well as they could do? So I think it's a very interesting model, but I also think that there's criticism or pushback that's possible here, right? Where I think it's harder to necessarily come up with open goals. There's not necessarily as much guidance that's provided about how to do that, or we don't necessarily have that structure that something like SMART goals, or Kathy's model provides. But I like the flexibility of something like this, where if we stick with that goal of being the best player you can be, that changes a lot over time, right? If it's a 8-year-old that's really getting into the sport and is thinking about what's possible with their career and is one of the best players in their region or in their state, what's possible for them in terms of being the best player they can be might be different from that 16-year-old that just started playing the sport, or that 65-year-old that is starting to get into tennis more now. Or, people have injuries, people have setbacks, people stop playing, right? So I think I like the flexibility of, let's see what we can do. Let's feel content with everything that we've put into it. And that more so being the measure of whether or not we achieve that goal.
Yeah, I personally, and I think we're both on the same page with this. The idea of becoming the best player you could be is a great goal, and I think it's a very good example of an open goal. And I think the reason I like it is it takes the pressure off to achieve certain milestones as being validation of whether you have made it or not. Um, that was really I think a big part of like Eric Buderak's TEDx talk was around that piece, like the pressure of certain outcome goals defining how you feel about yourself. And by taking that off, now there's less pressure to have to win or feel this need to win. And now it's different. And I can simply try to go out there. And I think this leads to the next type of goal that he talked about is a learning goal. So I really like this idea of a connection between an open goal of let's see how good I can get. All right, in order to do that, I want to set some learning goals along the way. And, with a sport like tennis, where it's so technical and difficult to master and competition is always presenting challenges, I think we're always in a position of being the student, no matter what your level is. I don't think there's any point in which like, all right, yeah, I don't really need to work on improving this or that type of thing or learning something new about the game. So I think when it comes to an open goal, like becoming the best you can become or seeing how good you can get, learning goals make a lot of sense there.
Yep.
I've been trying to really promote this idea of, winning, losing, they're both going to happen. But I really want you as a player to make sure that you come out of every match having learned something positive, something with positive intent, because that's the more that you do that, the results will really take care of themselves, right? Of course, we want players to get some wins because that fuels confidence. We can't keep sending somebody out, like a lamb to slaughter and just lose and lose and lose and then say, hey, how come you don't feel good about your game? So, right. Managing that makes sense too. But the more that we emphasize learning, the more that we're going to have a chance of achieving that goal of seeing how good we can get. Because now you're going to be more willing to try things, to have the courage to try to do something the right way rather than the weight of, I need to win this match for my UTR and so forth. So I like how open goals can be supported by, or at least the open goal we're talking about, can be supported by learning goals. I think the Ash Barty example is really pretty interesting. Because if we reflect back on that tournament, Josh, I mean, she like breezed through that tournament, as I recall. Mm-hmm. Did she lose a set? I'm not sure she did.
Yeah.
Obviously, somebody could fact check that, but it was not, as I recall, it was not. I think it was one of her easier tournament wins there, and it was almost like, man, why are you stopping? Like that was so so dominant, so amazing what you did. But maybe that kind of goal really helped her, right? We know this is the last time. Let's just give it our best, and whatever happens, happens.
And I think it's a great. Yeah, what's interesting about open goals and sort of the way that they're framed is they almost don't always feel like goals, right? It's more of sometimes it can be more of just a perspective. Yeah. You know what? I'm going to try to go out there and try to do my best, right? In a certain way, that is a goal, right? We can say, okay, did I do my best or not? Right? We can all probably think of times where we have or haven't achieved that. But to me, I think of other pro players. I mean, Nadal, I would say Nadal, Djokovic, Federer, Serena. I think, some of the most accomplished players of all time, I think have all actually in many ways talked in this sort of way. I'm trying to be the best player that I can be, trying to see what I can achieve, but it's not about I need to be number one. I need to have this many weeks at number one. I need to win this many titles. It's not as specific. It's not as result based. It's more based on feeling like they've done whatever they can in their career and feeling, proud of themselves at the end of their career. And I think what it does also is it can take a lot of pressure off. I think if our goals are sometimes too specific, too rigid, if they don't have that flexibility, we we end up fixating on this one thing. I need to win the US Open. I need to be the number one player in my region. I need to be play number one on my team, right? And I need to bump up from a 3.5 to a 4.0. And I think what ends up happening is rather than being able to notice the small wins, notice the achievements, notice what you're improving on, that there's so much focus on the gap. There's so much focus on, okay, well, that's great. Okay, I played pretty well out there today, but I'm still not where I want to be. And I'm still not where I want to be. And that being the focus. So I think instead we can, have this mentality of trying to do our best, of being the best player we can be, of having goals a little bit more open, understanding that there are always going to be factors outside of our control. Life happens, injuries happen, all these, we could play a player who's playing amazing, right? Okay, that's out of our control as well. But I think it really takes a lot of pressure off if we can go into situations with goals that are a little bit more open. I like focusing on process goals of the different sorts of goals. To me, that's, when we think about process goals, to me, sort of the two, I guess, frameworks or filters that we can think about are they within our control? And if we can do these things well, do we set ourselves up for success to have the types of outcomes and results that we want? There's no guaranteeing outcomes or results, but do we feel like we're setting ourselves up to have a good chance to achieve them? And these might be things like I want to use my self-talk as a tool, not as something that holds me instead of something that holds me back, or I want to really take my time between points, or I want to prepare for my matches mentally and physically in a certain way, or eat a meal at this time, or whatever it may be. Things completely in your control, but that if you can do those things well, you put yourself in the best possible chance from a performance perspective, from a results perspective, but it also takes a lot of pressure off because we're focusing more on those specific elements of our process rather than getting so wrapped up in outcomes and performance. And in outcomes and results. And I think that the author made a fair point about SMART goals, that it can maybe feel a little bit too rigid and maybe feel a little bit too tied to those results, where I think something like process goals, or something like open goals, as he was talking about, can sort of be the antidote to that, and can not only take a lot of pressure off us, but can cause us to focus on what's most important, whether it's big picture like an open goal, or whether it's some of the specific details like the process goals that help us get there.
So I wanted to share the details of a particular case of a player I'm working with, because we're using a blend, excuse me, of kind of specific process-oriented measurable goals, and then open and learning goals. So this is a player, very good player, but has throughout his career been obsessed with UTR. And to his detriment, it gets to the point where as he's getting closer and closer to achieving a particular rating that he's really wanted to achieve, that fear works its way into his performances. So he feels that pressure to do it, feels the need to win, and then reverts back to really kind of almost like a pushing game, a scrambling around, not being aggressive. And so we've moved to more of this open goal, see how good you can get, working on little items in the game, like hunting for forehands more, using the serve in specific ways, really emphasizing, and actually from a past episode, Josh, we've been using the mental scorecard that we had talked about and the idea of looking at it between changeovers and rating some of these things to keep the process more in mind as we're going and we're shooting to become the best player we can become, right? So on the court, that part is working great. Off the court, that isn't working at all. And so when it comes to, things like mindfulness, nutrition, the weight room, all that has kind of fallen off. So we're revisiting that and starting to add more metrics, more performance-like metrics into there. So certain things like with a timed mile, you're running it in a certain time, leg press, bench press, other types of things, establishing a meditation streak as again a metric, because he this player is he has discovered that by not being focused on all those that like UTR metrics and rankings and stuff on the court has really helped. He's playing his game much more now, but his motivation to do the off the court work has waned. So now we're kind of bringing this back in, and he believes it'll work. And so we're going to see how that goes over time, and hopefully we'll have some success. But it's interesting that given the task or what we're talking about, the strategy is a bit different, right? And so, I just wanted to throw that out there. Is that like there might be different strategies that you use in your own career, depending on what it is that we're trying to work on. And so in this case, we're using one method for the on-the-court performance, and we're using a different method for some off-the-court stuff.
I like that. And I think it's a nice mix because, again, that there's that open goal of trying to be the best player, of trying to maybe be a little bit more process focused rather than too results focused on things like UTR or rankings or things like that. And you're giving, helping that player be able to track and measure that progress, right? Okay, if I'm able to make progress on some of these different areas, right? I'm able to meditate more frequently. I'm able to get more sleep. My nutrition is improving. My leg press, bench press, some of these different areas are improving. Okay, we can feel pretty confident that there's a good chance that I will win more. And what do you know? If I win more, my UTR will go up, my ranking will go up. I'll have more opportunities to enter different tournaments. So it's if we can focus on that piece of things, it really tends to make a big difference. But I think what's helpful there with your example is that there is still that structure, right? It's not just I want to see what I can do, which is the open goal framework, which is helpful. But okay, I want to see what I can do, but what specifically does that mean? Right? What specifically does that mean? Okay, I want to be the best player I can be. Okay, great, but can we add in some structure? And I think something like process goals, something like what you're describing in terms of those performance metrics, make it so that a player can more easily notice, am I making progress in the right way? Am I doing the right sorts of things that are bringing me closer to that goal or not?
Yeah, am I learning in this process as well? And so, we'll see how it goes, with that player in with that different structure. And I think, one of the messages that I think we're trying to deliver today, Josh, is to think about your own tennis, not just in terms of what you're doing on the court, but if we were to start there, think about your skills, your strengths, your weaknesses to a certain extent. Are there little small goals that you could set for those? Or is it, and maybe it starts with an open goal. All right, let's see how good my forehand can get. Okay, what does that mean? Well, maybe I need to do this. Maybe I need to add more spin, add a little racket head speed, or whatever that is. But it can all start with that open goal of let's see how good I can get. And then breaking it down into, essentially a project plan. That's why I like the idea of thinking of your tennis game as a project. And there are different parts of that project. There's the on-court performance with the tennis skills, then the footwork skills, then there's some of the maybe the off court piece, the strength and conditioning, the nutrition, really the energy types of skills. Then there are mental emotional skills. Then there are character skills. There might be other things that go into that project plan. And the more that you are able to understand the process of performance at a deeper level, then the more you can work on your game and begin to make progress toward that open goal of simply becoming the best player I can become. We were talking earlier about me coming back and playing tournaments. So people probably don't realize I recently had elbow surgery to have a bone spur removed. And that bone spur had really prevented me from serving effectively for the last couple of years, if not longer. And, now I'm coming back and there's a tournament coming up in a few weeks. And it's a tournament that, in past years, I could look at and say, all right, I have a chance of winning that. But really, I'm only about 2 months into since having the surgery and just starting to play. And so I'm going to bring an open goal to it. Basically, let's see what I can do. Let's just go have some fun. Maybe let's play kind of an aggressive, fun style. And let's just see what happens and not be too concerned with having to win the tournament. More about, all right, can I just get out there and participate and get back to competing and enjoying that process. And so I'm really interested to see how that works, Josh, because there might be some barriers because there's a part of me that always wants to win, and that I'll just start grinding out matches at a certain point and playing long matches when I really could be doing something else. I could be trying to be more aggressive, etc. So I think it'll be important to how I talk to myself going into that event, how I really structure what I want to do, what I really want to get out of the event, and continually reinforce that in my own mind, not just say it once, but continually to reinforce it in the weeks ahead and while I'm there and even while I'm on the court. And I think, we talked about in that mental scorecard episode we did, the idea of having that with you on the court and grading it, similar to like what a golfer would do between holes, on changeovers, start doing ratings. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to come up with what I want my process to be, what I want my kind of learning and process goals are, and I'm going to rate myself on those changeovers and see what comes of that process. And maybe in a later episode can kind of share that experience with everybody.
I think that would be great. I think it would be great just to hear how that went. I can also share. I played a tournament about a month and a half ago, which was my first tournament in a while, and I, maybe not even necessarily thinking about it in this way. Tried to I would say approach it somewhat similarly and say, what, let's just try to do my best. This is my first tournament in a few years. Let's try to do my best. Let's try to not put so much pressure on myself that I need to do well. I have to do well. I have to win matches here. But let's go out there and let's try to do my best. And let's try to, have a good performance. And then I gave myself some of those specific things to focus on. For instance, my forehand, I wanted to really make sure I'm keeping more of my weight on my front foot a little bit more. I have a bad habit of sometimes hitting a little bit too much off my back foot. I wanted to make sure that my attitude was helping me sort of regardless of score. There were a couple other things that I was trying to focus on, and just being able to check in with those things, being able to track those things, being able to both be reminded of them in the moment and then also be able to learn from them so that after the fact, we were able to, you're not going to be perfect, right? There's going to be better and worse performances. But I think if we can learn from each performance, then it works in service of that broader goal where, okay, I can still have, let's say this tournament didn't go as well as I wanted to, because I was able to learn from it, because I know what I'll do differently next time. I still feel a bit closer to my broader goal of being the best player I can be.
Yeah, and I know you have plans for other tournaments, and based on that experience, I'm sure you will maybe adjust or maybe keep the same perspective and just keep building and building on that, and I think I'll probably be doing something similar. So this has been I think it's been a really fascinating discussion, Josh, because goal setting and goal achievement is a large part of what, sports psychology practitioners do, mental performance coaches do with their clients. So I think it's a very relevant topic. And I think it's always good to stay on top of what's new and the latest in research topics like that. So is there anything else that you'd like to add as a final note to SMART goals, open goals, learning goals, and how players can use these to, move their games forward?
Yeah, I would say that people can try to be a little bit more aware of some of the things that we say to ourselves that maybe get in the way of those types of goals. Whether it's I have to win, I should win, I'm supposed to win this match, I need to win. Whether it's that, oh, if I win this first round match, then I'm going to play this second round match. Even looking ahead to the Olympics, right? And maybe, when we're recording this on July 25th, the Olympics, the draw just came out today. And a lot of people noticed that Nadal and Djokovic are scheduled, I don't want to say scheduled, could potentially play in the second round. So it would be very easy for each of them to go into their first round matches against formidable professional players and say, okay, I got to win this match so that I can move on to that second round match. And probably many people have gone into tournaments or league matches with that same sort of mentality, almost overlooking an opponent. So I think instead of that, just trying to be really clear about what gets in the way, right? Whether it's certain words like should, need to, supposed to, things like that, whether it's just maybe not treating every match with the respect that's needed, whether it's focusing too much on the result piece and not too much on how we actually get there, or not enough on the big picture or the open goal. So to me, yeah, as sort of an ending point, it's, let's try to be as aware as possible and catch ourselves with some of these things that tend to get in our way, and then try to shift back into being clear about what our big picture goal is, and then being clear about what some of those specific steps are that we need on that particular day to get a bit closer to that long-term big picture open goal.
So I would, my final thought would be to encourage people to look at specific goals, look at open goals, learning goals, process, performance, and we can obviously help clarify some of that. So if people have questions, let us know about what those are, but really taking a look at all of those frameworks and borrowing from them where you think it works best for you, and not being tied to something like SMART, because there are many ways to do this, and generally we know ourselves the best. We generally know what motivates us the best. So certain people really might want that specific measurable piece of a goal, like a certain mile time or something, where others would rather just like, let me just do this day by day, sort of a James Clear, just, where I think he's more about systems being more important than goals. And I think he's generally right about that. But I think for some people, systems doesn't really do it motivationally for them. So that's a whole nother thing we didn't even get into, although we've talked about that in past episodes. So there are a lot of different frameworks and strategies you can use to improve your tennis project, and don't be afraid to experiment with all of that and figure out what works for you. That's the most important part, I think, of this discussion. So that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiq podcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon in our next episode.